Hello, it's Artur from Artistry of Code. In this episode, me, Grzegorz and Marek have talked about the latest issue of the Technology Radar. You don't know what it is? Then it's the perfect opportunity to get introduced. Each of us cherry-picked a few points from the report that we found especially interesting, valuable or unexpected. Are you curious about our picks? Stay tuned, we're almost there. If you feel like we missed an interesting point from the report, don't hesitate to write us a comment or private message. We won't leave it unanswered. If you like the content, give us a like, share the episode with others and subscribe so you won't miss another update. Enjoy the show!
Welcome to the Artistry of Code podcast, where we, together with our guests, are seeking ways of doing things right and having fun with it.
Software, architecture, soft skills, teamwork, and other crazy buzzwords.
Are you ready? Let's bring more value to the business.
Welcome, guys, to another episode of Artistry of Code podcast. We're still under the heavy impression of the last episode with Nicolas Debus. Well, I really look forward to have this guy on the show once again. I'm not sure how you guys, but I really enjoyed the whole interview and how the whole thing ended up in the end of the day. We've got a lot of feedback from you guys, so thank you very much for each and every private message which we've got. We are very happy that you've enjoyed the episode and looking forward to hosting new guests, because we're actively working on building up a pipeline or a lineup of guests for the future. So keep your fingers crossed. I will try to get more of them on board. Before we jump to the whole episode, we would like to also inform you about the fact that we started our own subreddit. So if you liked, you can find us under reddit.com/r/artistry of code. Right now, we're populating this subreddit with the content related to the previous episodes, but we are looking forward to having a thriving community over there, possibly starting up new threads, talking about new subjects. You can always give us some feedback on the episode, either on the subreddit or in the comments on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. So it all depends where you spend your time the most. And to keep things as usual, let's start with wrapping up the last 2 weeks. Marek, what happened in your last 2 weeks?
I will not surprise you, but it's again all about the construction. Fortunately, the software development making my living good, but I still have to work on the construction site after hours. And the last week, I've done something new and exciting to me, and it was like putting the epoxy coating on the floor. And the best fact here is that it's so nice yellow color, because my wife allowed me to do the garage as I want. So it will be all yellow on the floor and all gray on the walls. So can't wait until it's ready. Yeah, today the heating is getting installed, all the water treatment stuff, and also some finishing work. So can't wait to see the results.
You didn't tell us that you're going to have a yellow submarine in your garage.
I really hope that the house foundation is good enough that it won't become submarine. So fingers crossed here. But maybe Artur can tell us more about the construction things recently, probably.
Yeah, I also have a construction site, but I didn't want it to talk much about it. I wanted us to notice, Marek, that you are having more and more capabilities. So even if our IT world would, like get destroyed by some unpredictable dangers, then you can easily switch to a different way of making cash for a living. In terms of my construction site, yeah, it's there. I don't work that much on it like you. I let the professionals do the work. But I hope, Marek, you will prepare your garage in a perfect shape. Maybe even we could use it for a recording if it's so pretty. Why not?
Yeah, it could be like pretty industrial style recording. Yeah, it's popular on YouTube. Yeah, we can do
Let's
that.
check acoustic and we can give it a try. Yeah, so in my last 2 weeks, I came back to frontend for a moment, very quick moment, hopefully not for long. Yeah, I took a look at Angular and I actually got surprised by it because all the time I remember that Angular was a strictly front-end application. Right now, it seems like something more. I'm not sure how it's gonna work, but I very like the way how the code is organized. It's of course a first glimpse on that framework, but it kind of reminds me how the services works and modules in Nest. So the concepts are very similar.
I can give some input here, and I can assure this is completely not coincidence, because Kamil Myśliwiec, the author of Nest, is a Google developer expert about Angular, and he openly claims that the Angular design and the way how it's all organized was influencing the design of Nest. So that's why people work in Nest feel like home in Angular, and also the other way around, which is also pretty cool. And it's like a higher level of the abstraction of having full stack people working in JavaScript on both front end and back end, and this way we can also have like abstractions similarities as well.
Concepts translate way much better than particular solutions, right? So if the principles and the patterns are the same, it really doesn't matter what's the technology really. If the pattern is there, it makes it easier to understand.
What about your last 2 weeks, Grzegorz?
Well, my two last weeks, I would just highlight two things. So I'm still continuing my practice of programming workouts, and I focus on the F sharp still during those sessions. I'm collecting some code katas, which are specific for functional programming, to exercise really F sharp, because I'm past learning the basic syntax, but then I'm looking for like fundamental problems to exercise on. So if you guys have any functional katas which could be utilized in order to exercise that language, that would be awesome to share with me. I'm doing my search on my own. I'm still collecting, so we'll see how that's going to turn out. And the other thing which I would like to highlight from the last 2 weeks is that I was updating my open source tool, the AMQP Prosumer, which you can find on the NPM. Most of the time I'm right now updating the security patches, because the supply chain, when it comes to the dependencies, even though that's a small tool, some of the dependencies of my dependencies have raised security concerns. So I'm trying to patch things for security, which is going to also be something for this episode. I see Marek waving his hand, obviously.
Yeah, I can give a hint here to save you some time and advise to attach the Dependabot there.
I have it. So the Pendabot is writing to me on GitHub quite frequently.
Okay, so
I would say not due to my fault, but then again, yeah, he's looking for this, and I'm always happy that that somebody's watching, as you know me. But there's with that updating of the security parts, I also do the update of my own dependencies. So sometimes like types. Or ESLint, for instance, and last time the update of ESLint with the updates of some of the rules gave me additional pain when it comes to my code base in this project, because it exposed a couple of problems which I wasn't aware of. So when I was trying to update ESLint, it actually forced me to change a couple of things in the design of the application in order to comply with the new rules. So I didn't went into it with, ignore this line, ignore this line. I just took the responsibility over my design, and I've adjusted it to be fitting with the best practices. But then again, getting to the main subject of today's episode. In last March, ThoughtWorks, so one of the most interesting and probably well-known consulting companies, released their 26th volume of a so-called Technology Radar, which is essentially a gold mine for software consultants, I would say, which are looking for like up-to-date information about some technologies. But then again, what's very important to mention that it's an opinionated guide developed by ThoughtWorks, which means that ThoughtWorks, as a tech consultancy company, they're developing products with their customers and they're sharing their experience with those technologies along with their recommendations. So the radar essentially depicts their opinion about those technologies, which may or may not be really applicable for each and every company out there, right? So it only represents a set of circumstances in which those technologies were applied and how did it turn out in the end of the day. But then again, it's still a very valuable insight source, which is allowing people like us to gain a quick glimpse on how the world does things. And for the people who know me, whenever I'm solving a problem or I have to design something, I'm always asking myself first how the other people do it, how they did it before I was attempting to solve that problem. And the Technology Radar is actually one of the good places to take a look at if you are looking for means how people develop that. So what we wanted to do today is to have a run through the Technology Radar, but not going through each and every position listed there. But all of us, Artur, Marek, and me, we have our own cherry picks out of this Technology Radar, which we would like to highlight and shortly discuss here on the podcast. So perhaps let's start with Artur.
I went over the whole report, and the first thing I wanted to mention is a very general one about the fact that there is not much in adapt section, and this I caught my eye immediately. The second one that I saw is that there's also a lots of new things in the assess section. So what tells me about the technology is that things are changing fast right now. So they recommend to consider with low risk lots of things that they didn't have previously on their reports. So this is in some way surprising for me, because I thought if product is good, then it should stay there in this section for longer, or maybe even be in the adapt section. But we don't have that much of it. Have you noticed it? What do you think, guys, about this?
The thing with the Technology Radar is that the current issue focuses on a certain, let's say, time window, right? So there's a comparison mostly to the previous issue of the Technology Radar. So then you can see on it the moved in or out, whether that's a new thing or it didn't change. But also, what ThoughtWorks emphasizes when it comes to the way we should read the Technology Radar is that it contains blips for a given point of time. Which, if you would go, which means that if you would go to the ThoughtWorks webpage for the Technology Radar, you would see issues from the past which contain technologies which are not part in the current radar. And it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be used. it simply means that their recommendation when it comes to adopting them or dropping, for an instance, didn't change. So the fact that it's no longer in the adopt section, but it was there in the adopt on the previous issue, means most likely it's still to be adopted, right? So it's more like the current scan of the software landscape, but not containing each and every possible technology, because if they would be including all the JavaScript frameworks, probably the radar would be bloated and unreadable this way. So yeah, I share your view that there's not a lot of new things popping up in the adopted section. That's also like interesting. But then again, I think if we would really like to assess the state of art, we would have to also consider the issues from the past, like the issue from 2 years ago or 4 years ago, to have a bigger like a map.
Good that you mentioned it. For me, it's making it a little bit harder to read, to be honest, and that's not a good thing. I hope that someone from ThoughtWorks will listen to our podcast and they will apply this these notes to their methodology. Yeah, maybe it's better to have some kind of snapshot, yeah, to have it. But okay, coming back to my first point, I took the first one, which is adapt from techniques, and I see there the rethinking remote stand-ups and the recommendation for single team remote wall. And I have a feeling that pandemic like turned everything upside down in terms of recommendation work, what works in Agile, especially with the remote wall. I remember that there was so much pushing into the using of the physical wall with physical cards that you can like pin with your photo or with your, I don't know, with the magnet of your color on, and you need to move it, with your bare hands and it was like part of the ceremony. I was always on the side of those people that were more for the modern way, so using Jira, using other tools that help us to keep it in the cloud, to keep it online rather than offline on the wall. So we can work remotely, so we can check it every time we want, so we won't be like surprised by the by the cleaning people who clean the office, so they will maybe make the sticky card pop out of the board and they will just like put it on the on totally random place. And now the trend is changing. I have a feeling that they totally changed their attitude here. Yeah, their approach by 180 degrees. This is something that surprised me a lot. But I remember, guys, that even we, when working together, we were using the online board, and it was for us at least an obvious pick. But what are your experience from previous work, from previous time?
From the time when we were working together, I can still recall that we were using the virtual board already, but I can recall some analog notes on the even on the wall, but I can't recall the details. But it was like some queue of devs on call, these kind of things. So even if we were on one side on the digital transformation road, but yeah, we were still using some old way of writing things on the real wall, even on the whiteboard, but someone.
For me, changing things to digital, they came very fast, I would say. specifically when I've discovered Excalibur, which, by the way, is also mentioned on the technology radar, which I really love. As Excalibur is cool for leading any sort of meetings, but also to paint something and leave it there and also share with other people. So I didn't see anything else as good as this, which could allow us to achieve something like a commonly accessible internet wall for everybody. By the way, this also reminds me of those projects where you had those virtual offices. So you could create your own avatar and you would be able to travel across a virtual office, going into rooms where other people were. And they were even making things in a way that your microphones were on all the time. So when you were closing to another person, you started to hear that person more in your headphones. So you were switching rooms, virtual rooms, by wandering like in a Pokemon game. And then you were hearing those people staying in that room. So people tried to really, like, take the best out of the fact that the pandemic kicked in, and they try to build up various products which are allowing us to collaborate over the internet today. So that's quite a crazy time, I would say.
This is a way of metaverse making office. Marek, what did you pick from from the report that caught your eye?
One thing which contains two tools and 2 points is about the stuff which we already mentioned today, and it's about the dependencies and the higher level of abstraction on this is software bill of material, which is for quite a while in the adopt stage already. And it's about collecting all elements and all libraries, everything which is contained in the given software package. And it's not maybe obvious, but it's not only about, for example, in JavaScript world, the NPM packages, but we also have to consider the system packages in the SBOM list, and basically everything which, if we will think about the Docker container way of distributing, is coming within this Docker container. And that brings me to the second point, which is directly related, which is the tool called SYFT, SYFT. It's pretty hard to pronounce it properly. And this is pretty great CLI tool, open source, which can allow us to check the whole ecosystem and the whole, for example, Docker image. And it supports a lot of ecosystems like Alpine, if we talk about the system and the base system, through Dart, Go, Java, JavaScript, PHP, Python, up to even Rust, which is quite young, but it's already supported there. And basically every tool which we can imagine to be used in the modern software. And as we all know, and we talked about it in previous episodes, the vulnerabilities keep coming to the software. We keep having some dramas in the open source from various packages, various languages. So yeah, I see that really important to keep the control of the dependencies we use, and the SBOM together maybe with this SYFT tool is probably a really good approach for these days.
For me, the point that you raised is actually something new. I feel that with the vast and fast development of software, we need to adjust to this constantly changing environment. But previously we didn't have those problems, because there was not that much of already delivered code of products that you can choose from. So I see that the whole business is getting more and more mature. So we are thinking about those things like the supply chain, like the security of it, etc. For me that's a very valuable point, and even now I'll learn something new.
Grzegorz, what about your points?
Before I would go to the points, I would like to quickly draw the attention to the themes which are pointed out in the radar. So it's really nice that ThoughtWorks also commented on the issue of the open source software. This is something which is on our heads for quite a time now, to talk about the sustainability of open source. And they were commenting, the trend in the open source, that at some point, some of the projects like Elasticsearch or Docker, they decided to change their licensing in order to prevent some cloud providers from reaping off huge benefits from free labor, because the open source contributors are building tools and they are not getting enough, credit for it, and not speaking of financial benefits. And this links, to the issue which we were talking about. So this supply chain attacks, the outrages of developers on NPM when they're breaking the packages in order to manifest their disappointment with that situation. I think that that comment from ThoughtWorks at the very beginning of the radar is something which should be read by everybody, because that's an ongoing problem for open source authors and contributors, that big tech companies tend to build up very expensive products based on those tools with little or no return when it comes to those people really giving their own lives to build things like that. And the other thing, a theme which also very resonated with me, is described in the section, why do developers keep implementing state management in React? And I know when I was getting into React, the first course which I've reached was React plus Redux, and that was the way to go. But then again, just today, just before, as part of preparing for today's recordings, I've checked. I wanted to check the possibilities for React state management, and the first, even the recommendation for the search from Google was React state management libraries for 2022, for this year. And the first article which pops up, we're going to link this into the show notes as well, it's called Top 6 React State Management Libraries for 2022. So it seems that this year you have like at least 6 ways of implementing React state management, which to me points to an interesting problem. And I'm curious, what's your opinion, guys, here? Are we in the JavaScript world trying to always reinvent the wheel, or perhaps we are living in an age of semi-complete products trying to be bundled all together in order to provide a working solution in the end? And I'm also curious, okay, so if React is missing those functionalities, what do people in Facebook do in order to manage the state? So it's not part of the framework, right? So if you look at the other frameworks from the other technologies, they seem to be pretty much complete. But when it comes to here, there is something missing. Marek.
React in the end is not a framework. Yeah, they keep highlighting that, and their target is not to provide the full-blown framework, and I believe that's why it's somehow missing. But if we consider it as a library, it's not missing. It's just not the part of the scope of the delivery here. On one side, I would say people often think they need the state, but if you will think about it in details, like 80 or 90%, I can give like a rough estimation here, of the situations. We don't really need the state management, because people often do something like fetching the data from the backend and putting into the state management tool just to have the state management tool for which is in the end not really necessary in most cases, because you can fetch the data, keep it on the particular component handling the given page or the list, and when you leave this page, you don't need this data anymore. And like from my experience, when I'm playing with front end or working on front end at the company, the thing which is really needed for in terms of this like global state is mostly authentication, and in SaaS environment, some kind of customer or platform, whatever we will call it. And that's mostly it in terms of the global state, and everything else is like required just in place.
Yeah, I don't have strong opinion on state management in front end because I don't work in front end that frequently or even at all at the moment. So I don't want to pose as an expert or something. But I wanted to comment on what you said. If we were living in the age of unfinished project, and I think that it's partially true. The fact that it's so easy to deploy your own software is tempting for many people because usually I think it's also easier to make a fork, to maybe spend some time doing it your way, just like you would imagine, rather than convincing people to introduce some change to already existing software. Sometimes it's very hard, especially if the thing that you would like to propose is somehow controversial, or you can't provide convincing enough arguments to the discussion. And I feel like some software, like you said, top six libraries to handle the state in React environment, or React library is probably coming from the fact that people have a little bit different visions, but they don't have enough force on the wheel, inside them to try to convince people to follow this path in already existing project.
You're right. I'm just curious how this is going to turn out, in the 2023 then. I mean, this year may bring us a breakthrough.
Yes, there will be
somewhere here.
8 ways. Or 10.
Or,
yeah, or 10. Top 10.
We'll see how that's going to develop. But when it comes to particular recommendations or advices, which caught my eye, so the 2 points which are super relevant for me at the moment, coming from the technology radar, are the documentation quadrants and team cognitive load. These are the techniques which should be trailed according to ThoughtWorks, and why I find them relevant. So my current assignment when it comes to the day-to-day work is leading on a transformation of the current platform architecture into something which can be deployed in multiple regions over the cloud. And this is posing quite a lot of challenges in both technical means and also organizational ones. So one of the difficulties which I'm facing is preparing artifacts, meaning like documentation, reference information for particular stakeholders and decision makers, but also people who are going to be influenced by the decisions and changes. And if you're having like a 5-year production operational platform running, there's a lot of changes and a lot of people involved who have to be affected by that change. They will be ultimately affected. And structuring that communication in a right way is very important for the success of the whole operation, because if the people who are affected won't understand the reasons for which the change is done, this won't be communicated clearly, then there's a higher chance that the whole transformation project will fail. So the documentation quadrants technique here advises that you should use proper documentation, ways of documenting things, structuring information, depending on the audience or the expectations of what that communication should achieve. So I'm personally a fan of like quadrant-based approach. Like it's with the Eisenhower's matrix, where you have the urgent versus important, and you assign priorities depending on how this is placed on the quadrants. The same goes for that documentation. So this is certainly an area which I'm going to investigate more deeply in the upcoming days, because I think that I can benefit from this approach in some extent. Do you guys have an opinion, perhaps?
I feel like we have always been told that the best documentation is the code itself, but I get your point that it's not only a matter of communication with between developers and the development teams, but the different areas of organization. I have never heard about the documentation quadrants, so can you quickly summarize it? I feel like you did it, but or I feel like you didn't do it enough to understand what it is.
So what the documentation quadrant helps you is that it's mapping different means of documentation along two axes. The first axis is related to the nature of the information, whether that's more practical or theoretical. And the second axis maps to the context in which this is used, whether it's going to be used for studying or for working. So then you have different documentation options mapped along this, whether this is learning oriented, problem oriented, understanding oriented, or information oriented, right? So this maps to tutorials, to how-to guides, some explanation documents, or reference documents, right? So this essentially, the idea with the quadrant is that they are asking you a very simple question, whether the thing which you're trying to convey is theoretical or practical, whether that's going to be used to teach somebody something or not. And in a moment notice, you have information what kind of message or form of documentation you should apply in order to convey your message in the most effective way, right? So it's about, not thinking about oh, how will I do it? How will I pass that information there, right? No, you just have a two-axis approach. You just assess where this is placed, and here's your answer. You need a tutorial, or you need an explanation document. And when I'm looking at Divio, so the company which is backing this up, on their webpage, they're having that quadrant approach described with even some examples how this can be done in particular situations. So I would encourage everybody to check this out, specifically on Divio's webpage, because I see that they provided analogies and examples how to do it right, and this is something what we are looking here on the show, how to do things right in the first place.
I can just add one more thing to this point, maybe not in the quadrants specifically, but about the documentation in general. I know that, and I experience it myself, obviously, that it's often challenging and not that easy to write the documentation as developers, because we love to code and we want to just write a code which will be self-explanatory, as Artur mentioned. But yeah, for future generations, for the non-technical people, and to build general common know-how at the company, we should always keep it, I believe, good enough level of the documentation. And I have strong feeling based on some interviews I did with the candidates in the past, for example, that many developers still don't see the value of the documentation, which is surprising. So we can do all we can to improve our documentation.
The second point which I wanted to raise is about the cognitive load. So this is very relevant for me as in platforms. When you're working at a company, working with a platform, you are most likely having multiple teams. And the problem with multiple teams, or the challenge with the multiple teams, is that at some point when the business develops, the team structure doesn't necessarily change. So if you build up a platform like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you've created some sort of a team structure and developed different types of teams. Most likely according to the Conway's law, right? The architecture is going to follow how those teams were structured. And those teams were very good in the things that they were working on at that time. But over time, the business changes. New products have to be run on the platform. New use cases have to be supported by the platform. And sometimes there's an impedance mismatch between how the technical organization works and how the business organization works. And this misalignment leads to the problem of high cognitive load, which means that the teams which are primarily working on some areas, suddenly, because of new business requirements, they have to learn about the different domains. And I guess you guys also have been in those situations that at some point of time, your team starts to gain knowledge which originally wasn't there. It didn't have to be there. It was, in principle, sitting in a different team. And now what's getting assessed here, or it's being recommended to assess, is exactly to deal with that team cognitive load by applying the inverse Conway maneuver. So the idea here is, and this is something which I really advocate on my own in many years in the past, is that sometimes the team structures and the team organization has to change in order to support the new architecture. So if, let's say, we're going to perform changes in the system or implement a new business, the current state of things, how the teams are organized, how the development part is organized, should be challenged. It's really about having the right architecture in the product and teams backing this architecture rather than building architecture solely on teams, because this may give you organizational clarity because you will know which team is responsible for what. But then again, the resulting architecture might not be the best thing you may get. So essentially, you may be paying, for instance, more for your current architecture only because you're not remapping, not reorganizing the teams and their responsibilities over this. And why this is very relevant for me. So when we're thinking about changing a platform architecture in a way that it's going to support being deployed in multiple cloud regions across continents, this is definitely going to challenge a number of assumptions or ways the teams are working and operating today. And I kind of expect that this recommendation from ThoughtWorks is going to help me to convince the people in power that we would need to restructure a couple of things around the teams in order to make those things happen. So to bring that alignment and essentially apply that inverse Conway maneuver.
Yeah, you will need for sure this recommendation if you want to make that kind of maneuvers, because it's getting like it's introducing a lot of additional complications that maybe those people with power would like to reduce. The complexity of change is now totally different. You need to reorganize the whole team structure, like you said, just to introduce the new product. So yeah, it's the right move. I would support this statement, but it's on totally different level. And I think that
It's a very complicated thing. Yes, you're right.
totally different level of understanding the problem also by the people with power, like you said.
But then again, guys, do you think that this makes sense? I mean, like the whole inverse Conway maneuver, right? So adjusting the organization to have the right architecture, rather the opposite, right? So in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, this isn't easy because it requires a lot of talking and perhaps also negotiations. But in the end of the day, for you guys, does it make sense?
It makes sense to me, and I have pretty fresh experience of this kind of thing, I believe, because at my current company some time ago we were working in completely different team setup, and it had really crazy high cognitive load, if we will think about it. And at some point, the company, after a lot of feedback from the developers, came with an idea to rethink the organization of the company and look for the knowledge, for the areas of specialization, and determine the better setup of the teams to reduce the cognitive load on the teams. And yeah, we did it during one of the on-sites. We had the workshop, which all the team members could give their input there, and then based on the outcome of that workshop, the teams were reorganized. And I can admit that the cognitive load was like significantly decreased, and the comfort of work is much improved since the setup changed.
I also think that it's an ultimate way of optimizing work. But on the other hand, it reminds me of those arranged marriages that we can see on the TV shows right now. Like they have a psychologist, for example, they're matching the people together, and the same here is for me it sounds very familiar to the fact when you are changing the team organization, like the whole organization and the team squad to match the problem that you want to solve. So the drawback of using this solution is that you will have people you might have people in project that they maybe don't want to work with anymore. Like maybe they wanted to change something in their personal development, maybe try some new language, try some new technology, change something that could drive them. Instead, we might end up putting them in the same environment they have been so far because they're expert. Probably the team could benefit. So yeah, it might have some drawbacks, and you also need to take it into consideration what team members really would like to do, not only what they are super good at.
Yeah, this always has to be considered because having a properly motivated or having a motivated guy on the team is always beneficial. This also plays nicely with the whole concept of cross-functional teams, right? So, or the teams which are built to deliver a product. You guys also recall from the past the situations where there's a big change to be implemented, and now everybody gathers a team from different areas of the organization, let's say a working group or a task force is being created in order to deal with this. And that's also one of the ways of dealing with the cognitive load, right? So that team is producing the new architecture in this way, right? So also as an option.
So I feel we covered lots of rather team-related stuff, like our cooperation, how we work. But so maybe now let's come back closer to the code, to our environment where we feel the best. I wanted to mention a point from the report that is about the testing, and I have like two tools that I was a little bit surprised to see, but also very pleased to see. First of all of them is Testcontainers, something that I had a pleasure to work with. It's a super cool tool to cover your external dependencies in your integration tests without a requirement of using another tool like Docker Compose or creating some script in your pipeline. You just run the test, and the test containers do the job behind, set up everything, provides you with the mapped port. It's very easy to set up, and it works like a charm on your computer, on the CI implementation, without any additional work. Have you guys used it so far? Did you have this pleasure?
No, I haven't, but I feel encouraged. So maybe I will use some time
Yeah.
to play with that.
I totally recommend, because previously we used to like create this Docker Compose based scripts that needed to wait for the result, keeping it somewhere on the side on the variable that was an bash environment variable, etc. Now it's everything integrated into the code. The second one is a mentioning of a Pact flow package. It's not probably not for Node, not for our environment, but in general. I have always been a fan of contract testing, and always was seeking to have an opportunity to implement it. Of course, it's a big journey to implement it in the company when you have the API, when you have the lots of client of API, but it's very valuable to keep all the requirements that we need to keep when changing the API in the one place. And Pact is a solution that covers that problem. And I am very pleased to see that it's recommended, that it's widely used already, so widely enough so people from Tech Radar just used it and give a batch of recommendation for it. So it's also a point for me to use it in my future project. I think that even Frontech is perfect for that, because we have a SDK, we have a public API, so used by our clients, that pay for this service. And I think it's ideal place to start. So guys, keep your fingers crossed that I can sell that idea to Frontech and implement the Pact on my own.
I think that that's the biggest difficulty with the contract testing, getting the buy-in for this. This is one of the most difficult to explain concepts. Like if you're a very technical guy, that's easy to explain this to another technical person. But if you're talking to a business related person, they don't necessarily feel the notion. I think like end-to-end tests, integration tests, unit tests are buzzwords or statements which are widely understood, or at least in a minimal level across people, while the Pact flow stuff or like contract testing is something very, on one hand, powerful, but it's hard to understand, and that's why it's hard to get the buy-in for it. And I was looking at pactflow, and I recall that it was an open source thing, but I now see the pricing tab on the web page, which startled me a little bit.
That's something I need to check. But do you have an opinion why it's so difficult to understand for business or the value behind the contract testing? Because I have my opinion. I wanted to know what is yours.
Well, I think that the fact is that people are using technical terms like contract or abstraction level. When you're talking to a business person, they don't care about abstraction layers, abstraction levels, contracts, interfaces. If you're going into a room with people who are in power, but they just want to have the job done, using those words actually moves you out of the room without physically moving you out of the room. Like physically for them, you're no longer there. If you're starting to use these kind of statements. Okay, if you're working with a CTO, that might get you the buy-in, but not always you have the CTOs around, right? So the amount of audience for your message is pretty much reduced.
I feel like reason is a little bit different in my eyes. I feel like most of the products that we create is in the matter of fact closed. So the product does something, gives some service, but usually the API, the external one especially, is some kind of addition. So others can integrate with your product, but it's mostly it's not a main point of the functionality that brings the money. Not the integration, mostly some kind of addition, and they just strictly don't care because it's not the main course of the product, that the product should follow. But in terms of the business, when the API and the functionality of the API is the main income provider, then the situation might be totally different. And this is the point I want to grab and take, that we earn money by this API, and we need to keep it compliant, like working for all of our clients, and that's the way to keep the income flowing in. But okay, we talk a lot about it, but we know that Marek has also one valuable point to raise here.
The last point which brought my attention is a thing called 4 key metrics, which was defined by DORA research program. And it's about change lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, and the change fail percentage. It somehow resonates with the stuff which we talked about in the first episode about measuring the things which should be measured and are valuable to measure, but they are not always that easy to measure. Yeah? Because if we will think about the deployment frequency, it's pretty easy to measure. But if you will think about the change fail percentage, and the authors explain it also in the report, it's not that obvious to measure how often we failed with the deployment of the change, because at first we could just bring up the idea to check how often the deployment step failed. Yeah, but we all know that the container startup failure is happening not very often in the production. It may happen, obviously, but most of the bugs will not cause the immediate crash of the app, but it will start being exposed a bit later, maybe just by the call to the customer support or this kind of feedback channel. And this is not that easy to measure in the end, while being highly valuable to the business and to the teams, I believe. And recently at our company, we are doing a lot of this kind of exercises to like get more real and valuable data rather than getting data which is easy to get, which is really an interesting exercise to get like good data and find this data. Sometimes it requires some tooling around, but in the end, when we have the proper data and we becoming more data driven, it helps to move the company, the software forward, I believe.
Yeah, the 4 key metrics was something which also caught my eye. And I find this as an interesting measure to start to be measured, at least even in a one team, and not speaking for the whole company, right? But each and every team could assess this on their own if they would like to. And frankly speaking, if somebody's interested, they can do it on their own, even without involving the whole team into it. It's just you can start tracking this somewhere, and then at some point during a retrospective, say, "Hey, take a look what I found out when I try to apply this. Do you think that's useful? Can we learn from that?"
Yeah. So the first thing I thought is that we could use it on a retrospective meeting. And I remember from the time I was using Kanban that we used to review the lead time and cycle time changes regularly. Now, when we switched back to Scrum, I don't remember even once taking a look at this metric. So, but I find it very valuable, especially when you have the whole people involved in one place, so we can talk about reasons why it increased, why it's so high, why it's so low, give some recommendations or experiments how to change our attitude. But what I also wanted to say is that in Frontech we have been recently shared the positioning of our company in those metrics, comparing to the overall of the business. And for me, it was like a very interesting thing to maybe a way or tool to give people some more drive to change in terms not only of their work, but also the approach to work, the way of working, some kind of vision, how we as a team, as an organization, as a whole should work, and on which aspects of our work to put more weight. For me, it was like a refreshing, like seeing the direction where to go.
Looking at the timer, we're slowly closing up today's episode. So thank you very much, guys, for preparing your notes from the 26th issue of the Technology Radar by ThoughtWorks. We really encourage you, our dear listeners, to check this document on your own. It's very concise. It's very insightful. It gives you just enough information to run through. This is about 39 pages of solid content. So definitely something that you can run through very quickly. Each and every aspect is described in just a single paragraph, perhaps two. So definitely, please go there and gain some knowledge, gain some insights, because that's going to definitely build you up as developers. It's going to build up your teams, your products, and this is something what we are looking here for. Here, if you have some thoughts about what you've read there or what you've heard today, please let us know in the comments in the social media channels which we have. We're looking forward to having that conversation with you guys. But for now, that's everything which we've got prepared for you guys. And it's time to say goodbye. So stay safe and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for your time. Bye-bye. That's all for today. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Visit our page on Facebook and Twitter, leave us a comment under the episode, subscribe to the updates, and share it with others.
We would like to hear your feedback so that we can prepare more interesting content for you to enjoy. Hear you next time!